Hey, Andrew. Hey, everyone. So we'll wait for a few more minutes until everyone else shows up. See Maya connecting, Andrew's here. We're missing Angelica, Karen, Eric. Hey, Maya.
Hey, Marcelo.
How's it going?
All right. How are you?
Good, good. It's good to see you.
Hey, Andrew. Good to see you.
You're
Right.
muted.
Hey, Maya, how are you? Hey,
Hey,
how's it going? Where are you?
Rome.
Oh, nice. How is COVID there? Is it a problem? I may be going. I have to do a guest fellowship, and I'm thinking about maybe doing it after the first half of the semester is over here and flying over. Is it shutting down again, or everything's okay?
Well, if you can tell me, I would be happy for that.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah. I mean, right now it seems fine. I mean, they keep to. I mean, I think the Italians from all the Europeans have been the. Hi, Eric.
Hey, nice to see you. How you doing?
All right. How are you?
I'm good. You look very happy. I like to see that. Something happened today special?
No, just a normal 2021 day.
It's
trying
coming.
to keep the spirit up.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So I'm the official coordinator of this session, so for whatever that's worth. Yes.
How do you get that job?
I mean, yes, you only need to be like special, you know. Let's see if everything goes as planned. But one of the things I have to tell you is that we're actually live on whatever YouTube, I don't know, for whatever the, you know, huge hundreds or thousands of people been watching this. And so anyway, you know, if you want to say something bombastic, be my guest, you know. I mean, we'll probably increase the audience anyway. Don't spread any misinformation.
Are you advising pro or con?
I mean, anything that is going, you know, in favor of vaccines, of course, you know. So and science. So I think we're waiting for David Rue, who should be here, and Angelica, who should be here, but I don't see any of them. And I know my, you know, Sohaila and Shreya are my students that are here. Eric, you have what, a couple students as well?
There are three groups.
Oh,
one has 2 students, and the other are 1 each.
Okay.
I think one guy is in Beijing, another guy is in New York, and then I think 2 are in LA.
All right, and you see them, well, they're probably not all here yet, right? Just trying to see.
See one.
Oh, yeah. Let me see. I want to see. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 presentations. So yeah, I mean, we're still. Oh, there's Angelica.
Hi, Marcelo.
Hey, Angelica. Ciao.
How is it going?
Good, good. Okay, so. So, okay, let's just take it, so Shreya is here, Sohar is here. What about Siron Sao?
I'm here.
You're here, okay, great. Di Liang?
Here.
There you are, yes, yes. Sorry, I'm reading from the PDF that's covering my, my screen. Su Tianjin and Murphy Lee?
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah, now we're here.
Okay, great, great. Then Hans Steve, yeah, you're there. And Peter Klusak, you're there. And Nicolas Saracel. He's not here, yeah. Okay. And I see David here. So cool. All right. So I will, okay, I'll just do a quick introduction of the jury. I'm going to hit record now. So everyone is okay with that, hopefully. And, this is just for the students. And I'll do a quick intro to the jury and then we'll basically get started, okay? So we have Maya Alam here. She's a partner of Alan Profeta. They're based in Rome, Italy, and she's a lecturer at the Weizmann School of Design at UPenn. We also have Andrew Saunders, who's an associate professor of architecture and the director of the Master of Architecture program at also the Weizmann School of Design at UPenn. So to UPenn, great having you guys here. Then we have Angelica Lorenzi, who's a Design and Visual Studies faculty at SCI-Arc. Also, we have Karen Lorman, who's also Design faculty at SCI-Arc and teaches in the Design of Cities postgraduate program. We have David Rue, who's a partner at Root Climb and the chair of postgrad programs. And finally, we have Eric Moss, who's the principal of Eric Owen Moss Architects and faculty at SCI-Arc, and of course, the former director. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Marcelo Spina, and I am also faculty at SCI-Arc. So I guess everyone knows a little bit of drill. We have students from Eric, David, and myself, I believe. Angelica, no, you don't have any students, huh? Here? Not in this group, right?
No, I'm taking like a thesis year free.
Nice, good for you. So this is midterm, and I guess every student will sort of present his, her, or their work in their own terms, and I guess we'll just engage it. We have around 20 minutes per project, and like always, I don't know. I think it's not free for all, but I like to think it's free for all in terms of like how we go about it, and hopefully next time we're here.
On that manner, and I designed the spaces, designed the thing. So since it's since it is like a universal a solution for it doesn't have technically that provided in the site. So I considered what are the cities which has very rare medical services. So, and then I considered Ethiopia, which is like a most populous country in the Africa. Either when you see the proportion of the doctors to the population is 22 to 110 million. So I'm thinking picking the city and tracking moving since it's my main proposal is having moving from one place to another. I'm I'm going to propose like, in my upcoming days, like I'm going to propose like where it's going to be have like a central unit system. From there, it's moving from one place to another place. So this is where I'm standing right now. So maybe I'll just share only those images which I did it. So yeah, so this is like now
to interact with the user during his or her experience in viewing art, be that digital or in some cases even physical. That can be directly manifesting itself in physical, as you see in this slide, or by deciding to bring up from the infrastructure level below the
added to it.
But we don't know, like you don't have maybe I missed this, but we don't know how this operates on the interior, like on the inside yet, right?
No, I have not worked on it. So I have an idea of like how it's gonna work. Like as I said, like these are like having like a motor into it, like uniaxial motor, which like, because I've been reading some documents, like how the robotic legs works, like how the printed one. So when I researched about it, like they have like uniaxial motor, which can be like, move from one place to another place, how the robot's gonna work. So I'm gonna apply the technique into it, and then I'm gonna like, I'm gonna try to do like move from one place to another place. So that my main idea is to actually manifest. The building is just there to sustain the interaction between the user and what is their hologram.
So is it almost like an idea that it's kind of curated?
Perfect time to kind of analyze what you've done in terms of the layers that you produce with the project, and then maybe select the ones that you want to push further. For me, I think one of the really interesting components, again, given the fact that you're talking about animated components of city, might be the relationship. If you're looking from inside out, it might be the relationship of it to the city itself. I mean, if it's supposed to, and then if that's part of your project, and if it's supposed to move around in the city, it might be interesting to see how it cohabits with other elements of the city, right? Should we start to redesign some components of the city? Would it have its own lane? Like
you do. And so I think that deserves a chunk of your presentation. I think selling us on the scenario of what it is and why you're doing it, I think you don't need as much time actually to argue for that. It seems really relevant and cool. So I think you could like chop that part of the presentation in half and really try to concentrate more on the architectural features and why.
Thank you.
To pick up on some of that, I wonder, so the section is the least compelling part of the project. And I wonder if, as Tom suggested, the kind of dialogue is really about the below and what's retrieved to the above. And I'm not sure actually that you kind of want to experience the below unless you're just peeking into it. Because I don't think really what you're trying to do is make a museum below surface. I think what you're trying to do is make a museum that's in these rocks. And that ultimately that...
The kind of relationship or the difference between the individual and the collective. Because it seems to me that a lot of these experiments, or the 4 that you presented, are much more about the individual experiencing something. Whereas the setup that you have here is, I don't know the Union Station, the LA Union Station, but I presume it's super busy. It's a kind of very busy, big public space. And so I think like you could actually play that up a little bit more. Maybe it is a series of really kind of personalized almost pathways that people move through like on an individual scale, or maybe you are kind of setting up a little bit more kind of collective experiences of these individual, pieces. But I think
it's like not privileging anyone with any ability or disadvantaging some people who don't.
Great. These are really, I think, wonderful comments. I'm sorry, but the time, I got to keep on time here. Gordon, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sure, just a closing. So, Shantani, I don't think the situation is as catastrophic as you may have communicated this morning. I think you did a fine job. But I do think that, as has been pointed out, that there could absolutely be more development on the project side. But Shantani's in India, burdened by numerous sort of things, and coming to LA this week, right?
Yeah,
And so,
Friday.
yeah, so we've been challenged by getting documentation of Union Station. So you're going to
Your distinction between above and below ground, I think, just keeps reinforcing that. And so either you'd have to find a way to bring these two models together. If the rocks, which I'm not a big fan of calling them rocks, if the architectural, if the geometric computational blobs are present, perhaps the back of house either resides in some kind of
20% inside, 80% outside, you know what I mean? Like stuff after that might be to start, because right now you're approaching it more, even though these are not discrete units, you're approaching it in a like digital discrete sense, GILS type of, like modular components coming together. I think it might be interesting to find the kind of a middle ground between and I call it Viscombian approach, but you can call it whatever, like, like in terms of not only pre-built kind of modular approach that putting units together, but also dealing with super components and components, right? So scaling some of them up and down.
In that discussion, that rip away the concrete, make it something which is more natural, whatever that means. So I think you have some obligation to tell us what that means. Again, whether it's an urban context, or for instance, another possibility is use the concrete, keep the concrete. The concrete is also part of its history, and that's a different kind of river. And then there are all sorts of conceptual possibilities that are related to water, bridges, dams, islands, peninsulas. In other words, if this is a kind of hydrology IQ, there are ways to deal with this, including the inlet. Again, I think the inlet seems a little odd to me because you make it and then you cover it, and it seems like that is a respite if the water is flowing, and then you make the inlet where it's not flowing. So something is offered in the inlet that's not offered in the river, and so on. What is that? And I think the last thing, I think there was a bit of a discussion of the technical.
I think I feel like you are losing some of these beautiful qualities of these very complex surfaces. You are not really inhabiting them. You are maybe using them as more like floor or ceiling decorations. But they have much more potential. And I think some of your earlier renders, if you go to earlier clip from this video,
transformed into a room where the site is red as a rug and a couch and a bunch of other furniture around the space. This is what I'm currently working on and will develop further for the final. It's an animation that shows different scenes from the extension. As you can see here, it explores.
Yeah, maybe I can also offer a few comments. I think it's really interesting to think about what the thesis.
The half middle of the presentation with the kind of really amazing, diagrams and the plans and the axonometric, the black and white. I really, really love them as like representations, but I'm trying to understand how that then ties into your original premise. And I think it's a tricky question, today, like, I assume you guys are mostly working remotely still, right? Like you're working in the digital space. So it's like, how do you test the other senses? Like, how do you test smell or also, or sound or touch? If not all you have, but meaning that like you do have the digital environment to work with. And so, and that is, I think, a kind of larger question. Or also, as you were presenting, I was really thinking like, how would a person that does not have vision, like see or understand your project, like over Zoom, like it's almost like an impossibility. And so my suggestion would be, and it's a really, really kind of fantastic premise and question for a thesis, I think, to really explore. And I wonder, in your case.
Awesome, great work, Kunting. And now we have a next student, Christian Canonico. What a great surname.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everybody. How's it going? I'm just going to post the Miro board link. I know you guys are probably already on it, but in case you lost the tab somehow. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, you guys can see my screen?
Like you're trying to engage, let's say, the sensations of the world. I just wonder if there could be other, like right now in your project, sort of atmosphere isn't really thought of, or the ground plane, or I don't know, maybe the role of inside versus outside. It kind of feels like it's existing in a.
And so if you use that not as an abstraction, which is part of the conversation,
extrude that up and actually make that into a room, all of a sudden it's no longer that small vitrine that's sitting on the table, because all kinds of other discussions come into it, right? And at a certain point, I guess there's a question of legibility too, because like the stair is one of the better ones because it kind of translates
as something to be experienced and to look back on it and think, how did it make you feel?
Then of course the conversation will come up about the Olmsted site and why that, and why is it a deaf space? And, you know, and in fact, if it's use, then maybe one of the users is deaf and then it changes.
Process an author to objective experience.
So essentially this was the wrap, and you're seeing it in a much more structured, tight fit. You can begin to see these kind of the internal components breaking through, the samples trying to break through kind of the screen. And then to kind of wrap up, you see on the left, I mean, there's many different states of this kind of wrapping. You know, the example you're seeing above was kind of the tighter stretch. It doesn't necessarily reveal, or you don't have as many recognizable aspects that are pushing through. But as on the left, you can see the many different tests and so forth that have been playing with what happens when it just kind of masks or it punches through, or just kind of like the animation that you just saw, where it's like working through that kind of the simulation environment. You begin to kind of get, you know, this very interactive and dynamic kind of wrapping and facade.
Awesome, thank you.
And materials age and weather. Also in how you would want to push this composition that you have, that is really, I mean, in my opinion, very beautiful. Further, it would require similar to what Karen was saying, thinking about what's happening on the inside, but also what's happening on the in-betweens, right? I mean, it's not like the way you're proposing the
more different kind of conversation. So I think you might just want to focus on the architectural proposal itself instead of the critique of it, the form of the, because I think even SCI-Arc is really well known for making really good architectural models for the crits. I think it's already heavy.
Oh,
go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say something pretty quickly, which is that you know, I think that this topic of samples and your reference to other art forms, when those samples are used, there's some kind of a transformation often, or some kind of a reinterpretation, or even sometimes a like a critique. So I think the fresh part of your thesis,
because otherwise kind of what you're kind of doing is providing a cool tool for practice that corporations will pick up, which is alone cool. I'm into that. But it seems like you're interested in these forms and these silhouettes and all the stuff that you're kind of flashing up there. And I really,
I think you should understand the other side and the reasons for that too.
What's the difference between the buildings stay the same, the uses stay the same, but you have a canopy over your head, and the canopy seems to be texturally an analog to the literal surface of the moon. That section is a difficult one. You want to see into it. You're seeing it from above out of the 3D model.
Gave me the opportunity to work at this intersection of the natural and the artificial. So my thesis is interested in questioning the stability or the meaning of cultural inheritance and its future influence in the age of Anthropocene. How I sort of started out was by looking at insects and the way that they sort of carry their exoskeleton. And when I was sort of thinking about this like growth or almost like parasitical creature that could start to inhabit this space, I kind of wanted to start with this as like my reference, and then through a series of
look closely at this project. So the plastic conglomerate is described as redo some of the drawing up here, and then withdraw the edge condition. So it's, for example, in here you can see different scales of objects and different scale of line weight becomes agencies to blur each object and each space. So these experiments are my exploration to my own kind of design.
How do I experience it?
Yeah, so
or do I? Can I go inside or?
Yeah, I was kind of like imagining that it can be a place for like sort of bringing in like this new life into the site. So for like flora, fauna, and
value for my project is not the general concept of, oh, things will look beautiful. Sorry, didn't hear that.
From mine, on the board that I'm in, the bottom right one is different from the one that you have.
Yeah, this one, the one that I have in here is updated. So the one in the public mirror board is
Can you update the mirror board so we can see it?
Yeah,
be cool.
Obviously.
Because once you explain that, the two in the bottom are the ones that have like some other type of like texture. That makes sense.
I mean, the street level, the buildings below versus the upper level. Like how are those actually interrelated, and where those are happening on the smaller scale as well, not just the planetary scale? I think it's going to be important, right, to start to think about. And yeah, maybe that means you have to take chunks out of it to start to understand.
Which is, I think, fascinating. One, because it's so enormous. Would this be presented conceptually as developmental over time, as opposed to a project that occurs instantaneously? And the other thing I think related to what she just said, and also to piggyback on Maya, is this thing better because it's bigger? Or is it not? In other words, is there a level of redundancy in this? For instance, if it were more piecemeal, and just to say, for instance, if the moon were reduced, let's say, only to the areas, so this is now the Champs-Élysées of this project, and it connects the green space and runs over the top down to the river. And that's it. In other words, does it gain anything by being bigger and covering more? Or is really the issue what it covers and where? And what's related to the circle is, of course, the association.
Way when you go from 2D to 3D, right? So I think these two levels of abstraction that happens in terms of and maybe abstraction is not the term, but like losing some resolution and gaining some new ones. It might be interesting to kind of like look at that closer, just to not redefine or recalculate, but to kind of like hone up the kind of the system that you're proposing.
Someone brought up kind of the idea of sort of a modernist project, I think in the last one, and
this part is lifted up. In the middle, it's lower down. Then I changed it like this. So in the middle, it will be a central plaza, which will connect the residential and the retail through this plaza. This floor plan shows
a mystic creature like a goddess in the form of butterfly. And they have their own language, but the characters are already lost to time. So the batik, embroidery, and silver ornaments record their story. My study was mainly focused on the silver ornaments because I want to combine with the assumption I made that like they are like alive. So
speculate some possible effects brought by such kind of new architecture on the large condition. So MDRDPZ once came up with the idea is called Sky Car City. So compared with the traditional way, they choose to develop the the air as a new traffic system. So like they lift the building and generate the bridge and the platform to let the vehicle attach to it. So finally, they get like a very complex traffic system. And also in order to do that, they start to develop their own car and then to tunnel and then to the whole city. So for my own part, I started to with the same, like started from the robots. So they have like human-like mankind robots and animal biotic type, and also they have a transform type. And the things I'm doing, like the store for delivery requires have storage. So I also look into the like the warehouse. They are quite big.
Eyes, I'm trying to look for a more intimate symbiotic relationship between man and nature. In various visions of the nature, I rarely see like nature in harmony with nature. So I want to build another version of nature world, a future world that pays more attention to the ecological environment and and I want to figure out what part of the native culture could benefit our future life instead of like just leave them behind. Yeah, I think that's what I am now at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Yutao. Your renders are fantastic. The imagery is really well developed. The one question I do have for you is why a movie and not like an RPG game? Why specifically a movie is your form of representation for this project?
Yeah, the reason is actually in the movie, I can kind of embed it.
All the stuff from gathered here and pass through different tunnel and use in the belt to use also to use like robots, hanging robots to pick up to deliver to the different storage panel. And then goes above is like nothing particular is kitchen and for the ingredient preparation. And so I haven't optimized it, but still you can get the inform like how it works in the top view. It's like the red, the yellow one is container. So when they popped out, the the blue part, which is like a leisure and part of the naturally formed. And the reason why I introduced like a popping out function in this program is like, because, you know, replacing the human labor with AI is like a very long-term process. So I think like it can be like started as a people to use to like get used to it. So that's all. Thank you.
How are we going to deal? I mean, this is a larger question, and I'm going to segue right into Matteo. How do you deal with things that are not classified or that have, you know, conflicting properties now? I mean, we're in a kind of like, not in the Industrial Revolution anymore. We're now in the kind of the you know, really like way out there in terms of the kind of stuff we've made and how we will deal with it technologically. So I think that's fascinating, Peter, kind of like collect, like with this sort of new collection. And my belief is it could be all quite localized at that point. So rather than saying we're dealing with global waste, it's like just LA needs to engage its own waste, for example, and have its own kind of local scanning, you know, recompositing sites or something. I think there's just like so many scenarios here for us that it's fantastic. Note, even if it is only digital, the lab needs to be designed. It doesn't, yes, we know that. Thank you, Jasmine. This is true. Yes.
The slice through the building, the pull away axonometric, it became core, a familiar core, a familiar envelope, a familiar.
It's interesting projects. There's a lot going on. Has topos, whether that needs to just fade off into nothing. You know, it seems that you could build up within this project certain kind of scales of city scales that are happening. So as it kind of decreases towards those kind of peripheral streets, it may start to be kind of the lower fabric, maybe implying different kind of program, residential, these kind of things. As it builds up to this kind of major, I don't know if this is the kind of entrance to the city or when or where you would experience going through this kind of tunnel and this elevated highway, but it seems like you're really drawn to that as this kind of new threshold
that Jake was talking about. I agree. Like, I don't know that those are the things that you need to.
Hi, everyone. This is a great conversation. Jasmine, did you get a little bit of comment?
Or should it be, again, like a more master plan type of project? Again, if it's a planning project, that because you're dealing with
ancient constructed by robots, right? Like just that one idea, like that's already like a thing of its own, right? And then for me, you are very zoomed out because you are looking at the project. Like the most interesting part of your project is how all these things work. And you're just giving us a section and of the entire thing that is really difficult to understand what's happening on the inside. So I think that if you think about
forcing thousands of people to turn to the city shelters and the sidewalk. So if you make a figureground of Skid Row, you will find it ironic that most of the population is located in the white open space area instead of the black construction area. Delineates the fact that more than 4,000 homeless people now are living on the streets. The city's open space, while most of the buildings behind them are abandoned. So the blue area, the last one, please. Sorry. So the blue areas now are tents and shelters now located, and those blue arrows are the original entrance of Skid Row. And the lower is our proposal. Next page, please. So Skid Row is urgent to reverse the situation, starting from inverting the original urban pattern. Buildings in disrepair or abandoned need to be removed. And we got a section of this whole area. The all footprint will fold it into the three-dimensional building, and those footprints on the originally horizontal will become the public use of this building, like the garden, the school, or library, post office. Yeah, we are still developing this section of our whole city. That is.
You know, maybe you're taking the idea further that you are having some sort of, you know, urban response, and maybe that's built into the way that you have this linear strip and the way that you compose the landscaping kind of around, and the way it's integrating into this existing campus and the two adjacent buildings.
Which came in 1970s when the water was like, they needed to pump water above 7 stories. And same with
Kiesler's Endless House, in terms of a kind of non-oriented, you know, continuous kind of space in the larger volumes, and how that type of space begins to resist the monotony of repetition in the office tower. So I guess the question is it always important that you would have, there would be some kind of reference back to that registration of the office tower, the stack, the repetition, or do these spaces somehow break away and become autonomous? So I think that seems the game that you seem to be playing. And then the
rubber staircase. But I was also kind of impressed at like how a really kind of dry, technical, regulatory based approach to the staircase could produce this kind of crazy idea that one might not have thought of before. And I wondered, like, the degree to which you were thinking in your project of exerting that kind of particular architectural expertise, which characterizes some parts of the discipline, and which, in regards to the staircase, there is so much specific regulatory information, which in some way would never play a part in a thesis project. It's like something that you don't do, you know, you push to another area of your practice. But I wonder if sometimes it's that kind of regulatory safety, risk, hazard stuff can actually bring like an extra sort of seriousness or poignancy to your like who.
They just kind of show up, and now when they show up, they're now rooms as opposed to buildings, and I think that's a little bit what Peter was describing.
Yeah, exactly.
The kind of interiority of those buildings is really specific, and there's a direct relationship between the interior of those things and what the ultimate kind of geometry is. That then
So what kind of new properties do you bring there? What other ones still reside within?
Because you need certain height. So all the buildings above 300 meter, which
little chunk studies, really beautiful. I'm trying to think about sort of a fluid relationship between inside and outside, what that could mean for the housing proposal. I mean, as Andrew already said, there are tons of references out there for that, but and as already discussed, the kind of like taking the entire city block and folding it in on itself seems interesting as a provocation, in the sense of that you're inverting the figure ground. There's not enough housing in the city of LA. You're inverting. Yeah. No, I did not expect you to solve homelessness right now. I just something to think about.
Okay. Yeah, it kind of comes back to I think Eric's comment on the earlier the science laboratory project, right, about this metaphor of this this conglomerate of plastics that's found in the sea, and I think Eric was proposing an ethical question about whether that's a good thing that we want to implement and push, or is that really something that we want to resolve and rid. I wonder the same question about Skid Row, and I think what Maya is saying, that it maybe needs to be discretized and broken up as opposed to making Skid Row even larger, which is already has its own kind of issues. Are you amplifying those issues that are problematic by making it still identifiable as one thing that even gets?
And on the right side is the computer interfaces. Here is where I kind of, for computer,
as clean as your blue model would describe, and so you need a way to absorb or at least react to that messiness.
Yeah, I would resist the urge to use all the like more square orthogonal shapes because your linear line kind of chose that all right now.
Yeah.
You have some like very articulated, like was mentioned earlier, project.
So my name is Ilaria. I'm gonna present my thesis work. As the pandemic outbreaks into the sense of an overlay of the drawing and the 3D object, but it kills it for me once I see the render. It becomes too normalized in a way. It kind of goes against what you're talking about in terms of this idea of drawing the building. And I'm more attracted to kind of your screenshots or your VR experience. So I don't know if that'll somehow make its way into the overall reading or the final reading of your project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted
escape me, but the idea of kind of being with others, but being high or being on some kind of narcotic is familiar. And sorry, I'm not saying you're designing a crack house, but it's like it could be like a place for people to be together, but to be alone, and or like, you know, in the movie Inception, I'm thinking of like the crack house in the film New Jack City, or in Inception, there's the moment where they're like,
you have to focus. I mean, I understand completely, you know, your argument, but I think I remember you had once this idea. How can I? Is there another idea of a democratic space or something? Or I mean, there was something like that on the basic. You know, seeing that, I think there's something interesting what you say, that can there be a democratic space by saying the only way you see that space is by an individual perspective of something? Yeah, you know, like a scenography or a set or a stage. I found that idea interesting that you have here. There's this multiplicity of these boxes, you know, and you can, I don't know how it looks like, but I also found that the question that you had difficult, but I found it also beautiful to raise it. Yeah. You know, what could be the representation of a democratic space today?
Yeah.
Even when you cannot answer it as a thesis, but I found it as a question interesting. Perhaps you come back to the idea and say, well,
it's this camera here.
Yeah, this is the part of the narrative that I kind of lost. So where's that camera?
Especially this past like year, even to, you know, past 5 years, it's really brought a lot of that to light. And I think you could maybe explore, like, if democracy isn't possible, like what realistically do you think is possible, and how can you achieve that through this film and through our kind of shared history of using the Oval Office and all the different presidents that you're choosing to highlight in those kind of moments, and how can you synthesize that into what you would like to see and what you think is possible on a realistic lens?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, there's one aspect to your project which I don't know if it's intentional or maybe it's even just in my mind, but it's the kind of parafiction that we associate with stage sets, and seeing things that we know are very serious and real, like the Resolute Desk, set into a stage. And, you know, and all of the other kind of conspiracy theories of did we go to the moon or did we not, and the stage of the moon and all the things that we know. And I don't know if that's intentional.
It might be really interesting to think about it as a platform, and then how you can think about the narrative as a...
It's not even like, you know, possible to answer within the time frame that you have, but I do think that your thesis is something that is almost like a question that you can take on beyond the thesis. I think that's for me like what thesis is, that like you can actually start to question certain kind of assumptions, but also methodologies that then you can then take forward with you, you know, after school. And so I would just really, I don't know, like it's really odd that like a VR as a kind of relatively new, supposedly technique produces
to remediate climate, right? Like you don't have to get into the specificities, but really what you're doing. To me, what you're doing in my own terms, you need to do it for yourself, put it in your own terms, is you're creating a complete inner world, totalizing environment, screen world. And that's where Ibrahim was talking about designing the interface and really being hardcore about that and kind of forget, and what your proposition does is that like there is no outside. The outside doesn't matter. Everything's on the screen, everything lives on a screen. So really the form of this thing doesn't matter. The fact that it's a circle or a square or whatever, or this or that doesn't matter. And so the whole, it's all about the inside, and it's all about the inside for the needs of the interface and the user experience with the interface. So what then makes me think is like the chairs really need to be designed. And are you like
with kind of a new mediated reality of the 1970s by an Italian architect. So the project is kind of in dialogue with that too. But I like this idea of like introducing the kind of the OS kind of operating system kind of idea into this. And maybe
well, now that you mentioned it, who is it? Is it like Joe Colombo or Sotsas or who is it? Guy Lenti?
It's so the references are called La Casa.
They're in the same area and have the same architectural function, but each of them is different from the content function of up to the form. And I developed the form of my project based on these three models. And I cut them into different small pieces, and all these pieces carry their ground panels, and then combine them
with your clearly beautiful land.
I think is so interesting in yours is the space of representation is gone thrown back into the multiplicity of individuals. Yeah. You know, and I think there is a really interesting idea that you could construct this endless space. It's always the same copy, but it's always, you know, incorporated by different form of individuality. I think it's really interesting form of representation.
Yeah, for sure.
Argue the largest religious, except it's not religious.
Cool idea, and assembling the one community of the Sherman Oak, and the checkerboard look like ground is different units of the prefabricated ground, and they all have different maybe have different scale texture, and the system can operate individually. And
the formal massing dramatically suggests a new silhouette to a city that has been growing and expanding from that specific location since 500 years. As we can see, the project is 2,000 feet high with 115 floors. It is slightly taller than the One World Trade Center's antenna. And talking about the project diagram, so this was the formal massing that I was working
for decades. Everybody like Emilio Ambas, like nobody pay attention to it. Same with James Wine, remember? But I think I think then the project is and the thesis is in trouble. And I don't know what are the mechanisms, but as Ambas is one example, but I don't know, I can think also, actually in a strange way, I would argue that a lot of the recent work of the last 5 or 6 years of Herzog and de Meuron, they do a lot of these problems about the fake opacity and transparency and so on, and the banker or no banker. So to me, it's one of the most...
The land ordinance of 1785, the land that was ceded, or to plot the land that was ceded.
Review. So thanks very much, everyone. Great work, really wonderful. We have this all on recording, so you can go back, all the students can go back over this material, which was, I think, really, really useful. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
Yeah.
And John Cooper, you should start thinking about making a book about chat comments.
Absolutely.
Compile them.
Yeah, compile those.
To become a abstract model for the city. The parallelism, diagonalism, and rigid constraints create a meta principle of organization for the agri-urban society, one that is unique in form but allows for interwoven modularity. We can also begin to program these cities with robotic farming, local energy generation. We can use advanced technologies like autonomous drone transit. We can utilize an electronic.
That's the hook. Why are maybe people not believing in it? Why doesn't it have, support yet? Or is the financing missing? Or, these kinds of things, those are a couple of things that you could look into and then complete the narrative a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. And I think the next thing is to then look at these drawings that are fantastic and inspiring and so on, but to then bring them also back into our realities and to see how that can come together. Yeah. And that would bring me then maybe to my next question at that point in the future, where I'd like to see, okay, how many steps do we need to do, and how, it's like, how many phases do we need to make it happen, and when does it start to become successful and so on. I mean, this could be a huge project. Yeah, it's probably not going to happen in the
what it might look like 10 years after it's built from Google Earth, So I think that's the difficulty of imagining that and projecting it and representing it. And so you Peter, discovered that's not a small problem. There's an easy way to do it, just, I don't know, like extrude the diagram or color it or something, but it doesn't, that's not an answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I'm interested, Peter, because I'm not familiar with working in this way at all, but I really, I love the ambition of it. I do like, on a simple level, its critique of representation and its own syntax is pretty.
Problem here of buildings tilting upside down, sideways. I mean, these are things that are maybe not typically possible in steel, but certainly possible in composites. So I'm excited just to see like how this all plays out. I think it's going to be exciting, and I totally agree with Martin. Like in the context, like how you will represent it in the end, this will be the most kind of essential and compelling thing that you show us. Like, are we, underneath it, looking up? Are we droning around it? Are we in?
Want to bring back from this investigation that I would assume prevent you from falling into the status quo of the normative, right? So these are new relationships that are going to motivate the normative, all the things that you need in your city, right? What are, like, could you give me like 3 relationships that come out of that you're bringing back?
Yeah, it's, I think something that's interesting in this software is
be like billy goating up the side of it, Yeah.
That would be cool.
Yeah, Kareem, I just think we need to sit down and just do more versioning of like what this mass is. And I think there's a bunch of ways to achieve the mountain that will both deal with like the egress situation. Maybe it won't have to raise down so much of the city below, but has the basic same approach.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks.
Position that, or that's a topic that goes unmentioned, and it should be mentioned. The other thing is, I don't know whether it's an irony or just a curiosity that circuit board software would somehow be analogous to a kind of distribution of domestic or residential or site plan organizational dimension. And I assume to everybody here is Lewis Mumford, who wrote over and over about the meanings, the cultural meanings of city and the aggregate of history and points of view. I mean, I was just looking, and this is just a personal aside, but we had to rent an apartment in New York City for the summer, and we're on Central Park South looking north over
the Jeffersonian grid. You get the whole array of what happened to that grid. And you see the failures and the attempts and all kinds of things of how to program the landscape and so I think what you're doing here is, or what you want to do is to make some sense out of what has happened so far and which steps need to be taken in order to implement this new layer. And that is not only maybe a technological thing, but it is also something of communication, sort of about land and about people and what people are doing with land at this moment, and what they should be doing with land in the future. So, I mean, it's a big issue, and I think over the next weeks you will have to decide where you put your focus in order to not get lost in the task.
Suppose
color, but it's like out, out. It's not interior, but exterior, but very interior kind of interior.
Any other potentials it might have had beyond form, right? Although I'm denigrating that process a little, I myself, I mean, that's how I work, you know, and yeah, it is interesting to maybe consider what that might have been all about, you know, and not slip into it as blind habit nor celebrate it unintelligently. But I think the potential of your project has nothing to do with formalism.
Discrete areas of urban space within a much larger grid continuum. So I think, like, I would even suggest you go denser. I think these sort of pile of sticks needs to be twice as many to really make that clear. It's like a tent, or like you said, a trellis at the beginning inside the city, and that's where I think it really will be super original and get away from some of these other references, the old sci-fi references and like sort of mid-60s urban references.
Inspiration, the aesthetical language, and kind of, you know, the elements and components, but also the way that we behave, the way that we interact with those elements, right? So are those
intuition? It's not really about it looking this way.
You can agree.
It's strange how things like this have a kind of afterglow, you know. I think we all feel that. You open up your computer and looking at, the fuck is this stuff? Oh, and it's beautiful in some odd way. It's like glowing, similar to when you're in the airplane flying over heavy industrial districts and the net. Had the circuit board plan, I don't think you would be able to imagine what a circuit board would look like. Although in retrospect, it makes all the sense in the world. You know? I think this is the odd process problem for Peter here. Because he doesn't know what that circuit board might look like.
I think it's altogether about its appearance and its graphics. I think that's why we're looking at deformed or reformed or modified itself as it encountered real topography or land. Anything that would feed information into this that begins to select in and out of the content instead of an allegiance to a diagram, I think largely because the various pieces of scales and connections and points and so on are by analogy associatable with some kind of large land plan, and it was juxtaposed quite literally with the Jeffersonian grid and with the Wright plan and all of that. So it's another version of that, quite literally. And I think in this case, the literalism of it compromises its content and its reality, its topographic reality, and it's a reality in terms of association with existing urban strategies and content. So it's not in the middle of nowhere.
Presentation. Great. So we have 2 more projects. Jonah, are you ready?
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Yuta. Thanks, everyone. Whose dog is this?
That's my dog.
Oh my God. No, we want to see him, her.
I'll bring her after.
Okay.
In between.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jonah Klinghoffer, and my thesis is titled The Laminated Nexus. This thesis idea challenges the outdated 20th century model of the skyscraper, which is a vertical extrusion with a central core, and it becomes more exclusive the higher it gets. So prevalent in major American cities, this hierarchical model typically includes a parking structure on the first 7 to 10 floors, while the rest of the building hosts private spaces, leaving only the ground floor for public use. And here are 3 examples of this model in Miami. And so this thesis thus proposes a new type of mixed-use architecture, one that leverages a floor area with height and width, allowing for minimal footprint while still inhabiting the city in a vast area. This design is lifted off the ground, and it actually bridges across the Miami River, connecting Brickell, which is the financial district of the city, with the historic center, a neighborhood that is rather poorly maintained in downtown Miami. So hyperthinness is something I wanted to kind of dial in on. And so this extreme thinness of the building extends beyond the bounding box of the city block. And it allows for new opportunities to inhabit the city vertically while engaging with neighborhood buildings. So clearly circulation is an issue that has had to be tackled and kind of thought out. So I did want to counter the notion of the central core and introduce a series of independent cores with unique entrance points that allow access to the levels of the suspending building. So the building is designed in elevation. The facade itself acts as a tool to compose the interior and exterior. So a configuration of parallelograms and chevron shapes are staggered behind and in front of each other, and a thick graphic outline dents through the surfaces of these shapes and unifies these discrete pieces into a singular laminated figure that is aerated. So zooming in kind of closer to a swatch of the building, there's a patchwork of glazing and solar paneled balconies along the shape. And this was kind of a method to diversify the skin as well as the program within. And at the same time, it brings kind of the solar field into the city and re-centralizes the energy generating space. So peeling off the exterior shell, a sample of 3 programmatic zones are shown, including living units, classrooms, and a fitness center with recreational spaces that are planned to be squeezed in between these zones in the form of restaurants, cafes, and auditoriums. So the idea is that the building hosts a variety of programs along a double-loaded corridor, and this creates a sense of discrete community within the larger nexus, a kind of communal living with private spaces as well as shared zones that cater for the residents and the public alike. So in this plan, you can see the kind of different programmatic zones that are closely fit and tied within each other to create the sense of community. And so this external sawtooth-shaped catwalk that you see on the exterior of the plan is generated from the inclinations of the solar panels, and it kind of engages a communal outdoor space as well as individual balconies for the individual units. And this thesis attempts to create a new microcity that is layered through and over the urban environment of downtown Miami to deviate from the city grid, reshape public spaces of downtown, and kind of rethink what it means to live in a metropolitan city. Thank you.
I have only one question, Your Honor. It seems like in order for all these projects to work, they have to have a thesis of the oblique, meaning the diagonal, yeah? Meaning there must be a quality in this diagonal, yeah, that makes it different than just being a vertical building, yeah? Yeah, and so I think this idea that it suddenly is an urban fabric in itself. You know, I mean, my question is that it seems there's a formal entity in there about the diagonal or the triangle or the rhombus, or I don't know how you call it in English, the shifted rectangular rhombus, yeah. That gives this whole thing suddenly a different understanding. You know, it's not a let's say slab building from Oscar Niemeyer in Sao Paulo. Yeah, you know, I don't know if you know this large mega slab. It has an other quality, and I think that quality, is an urban quality. You know, because it suddenly allows you to produce connectivities, infrastructures, you know, that are usually on a different scale than the scale of the building. Yeah. And I think in your case, it seems like you take this one step on and say, no, it has also another functional ability. You know, there are more than just one function. Yeah. So I think to me, that would be interesting to work that out. Where is that infrastructure? So for example, is this the gigantic staircase? Is that the kind of collective space that goes through? Yeah. So, and I think to me, that uniqueness of that form, yeah, I would put a little bit in the forefront, because otherwise it could be a graphical project. You know, it could be just, you know, it is a shape, but the shape has a quality that usually that is not happening within buildings. Yeah. So and I think that's perhaps the thing I would advise.
Why does it produce a wall? Is that critical to the project, that it produces this kind of flatness?
So this laminated figure is intended to be kind of aerated and do the opposite of a wall. I mean, it might come across as a wall, but the idea is, again, to like repopulate and densify an area of a metropolitan city. And the way of doing that is to go vertically with hyper thin kind of floor area ratios. And I mean, that's definitely a crucial kind of obstacle in this thesis. And I chose the site of Miami, downtown Miami precisely. And there's this constant battle with the real estate and the residents there, because there's a boom of developments that are happening all around. So there's always this constant kind of notion in the residents that, you know, you might lose a view like tomorrow because of the continuous development. So the priority is the view on the water, obviously, which is due east, and that's something that I definitely wanted to tie in with the kind of design I'm working with.
So on the west, you don't have a view of the water?
No.
Oh, okay, because I was from the view you had up previously, I was like, this is actually the like most smart location for this project because on both sides you'd have view of the water and you're not obstructing a lot of people's views. And so
Yeah,
it
the view of
almost
the
seems
water-
like if you could find a site that was on more like a peninsula or something, where if it was situated kind of, because in that view, it looked like it was situated like perfectly in the center and that there was water on both sides. That's what I was thinking. It kind of furthers your argument of like a wall is good for this site in particular because it's creating a solution that obstructs the least amount of people. Where it is now, like the people behind it, they're going to fight it to the end. You know, you're just going to get caught up in, this is thesis, not the real world. But if it was, you know, people would fight that to the end.
Hang on.
I think that's fair to bring it up. I don't think the thesis alleviates some basic, criteria of projects, particularly if you put them in a real city, then it's different. If it was just in a, in like a virtual environment, we can, give it all the time in the world that it wants to be. But I think the minute you drop it into Miami, and I know, Jonah, I know you're aware of this. We've talked about this many times. I also, of course, said this was going to be said at the review because it's like, and there are a lot of political implications of walls these days. So I think it's one thing that has to be contended with. And it could be either it's just slightly cited wrong, or it needs to really be in a more aerated zone where it's not blocking anybody. I'm not sure. Or back to some of the earlier comments, I heard people like Peter kind of hinting maybe it could even like, you didn't say this, but it kind of could be oblique and like fold or do some other things to reduce its overall sort of wallness.
My reaction to the wall is that, and the reason I even asked the question is that it seems like what you're trying to do, much like the prior project, is take less used space in the city or space that's kind of in between or provisional space and find opportunities through a kind of strategic system to add value back to spaces that we don't currently see as particularly valuable or inhabitable, let's say. And so in your case, when I see the line drawn on there, the line is kind of a top-down, almost modernist planning way of looking at the problem, as opposed to what I think you're really trying to do is find those interstitial conditions that then allow this thing to add up to kind of buy back space. And maybe that's not what you're doing. And that's where I question the flat graphic that produces the wall. And I wonder if, like the hinge in the last project, if the flat graphic gives you a kind of, it gives you a way to produce a formal logic, but now what good is the formal logic if it doesn't operate in the way you need it to within the environment?
Marty, that's interesting. Sorry to interrupt. It's an interesting point because you see, when I look at it from that point of view of the plan, it reminds me of Stephen Hall's bridge projects, rather than the wall ones, that it, and that would, so that it actually bridges, over and is an infrastructure thing that is inhabitable, and
I think also if you didn't want to change the site, you could maybe reassess your graphic kind of, and maybe that graphic is more influenced by whose views you're blocking or the urban context. And maybe there's cutouts in the graphic so that you're obstructing the least amount of people as possible.
Well, I first wanted to say, Jonah, really great presentation and a lot of work here that's allowing us to kind of get into a more detailed conversation. And I like Peter's prompt. It's like, what is the diagonal really doing? I just find that such a great question, because not just because that's a kind of a thesis question, but because it really asks you to be both conceptual and technical and really work on that problem. So, is it that the oblique is offering you, or the diagonal's offering you a path, a different kind of way of moving? Is it offering you another, like a view that you can have the building needs to be one way and the view needs to be the other. And just as a kind of related conversation, Matteo and I were talking about the skylights on Sterling's Leicester building, where there's this fantastic interview with Sterling now that's available. And Sterling's basically describing how the lab has to be one direction. The site is like cramping him in and so forth, but the lighting for the lab to get certain kinds of daylight is really what made the oblique on the skylights shift. And so the building has this kind of, double geometry going on. And I think something like that might be one of the kind of formal games that would really help you to answer the questions about, like, well, the wall needs to be this way, but the view needs to be that way, or the light needs to be another way, or that, so like being able to use those constraints, and that the oblique is kind of your way out. It's like you had to do it. I think it would be, really amazing. And then even just to have, again, like an animation or a series of diagrams that kind of show you, like, well, I thought I could just make it straight. I was just going to play this game straight, but you can't play it straight. It has to do some other kind of move. And this would be, I think, quite compelling. So it doesn't seem like it's purely graphical or just kind of, like, I like it this way. But that you were kind of like really had to like work into the oblique.
I guess that brings up the Leicester building brings up the issue that there are often conflicting and contradictory things we have to solve in any given project. And so that kind of top-down imposition of both the line or the graphic and the elevation doesn't allow for those strange things that occur in every project to kind of get their own voice. And so when I'm looking at the image on the screen, I keep blurring my eyes, the old trick, and it becomes axonometric at certain moments where I start to see other figures that show up. It's also could be misread as the plan in some way. And so I think there's maybe more in your original drawing that might allow you kind of ways out of the problem you're producing for yourself.
Bye, guys. I gotta go. Thank you so much to everyone. Great work. And I look forward to seeing the process.
Thanks, Jasmine, for your comments today. So good seeing you and wonderful discussion.
Fantastic.
Unless there's any other comments for...
Sorry, I didn't mean to butt in. Sorry.
No. It's all good.
No, I think I killed the conversation.
Is there... No, I like that there's like a difficult problem for you. I think that's good. It means you're going to have to really work at it. And I think that's a great thesis. And it's kind of like, get yourself in trouble, get yourself in a spot. We know it's not an impossible spot, but a nearly impossible spot's a really good place to be for thesis, because it means you're going to have to like figure this out. And from what I'm seeing, sorry, that's our timer. From what I'm seeing, you clearly have the skills to be able to do it. So it's like a worthwhile pursuit. So just double down, go for it. I'll give you the link to the Sterling thing for a little bit of inspiration too.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. Any other comments for Jonah, or we'll switch over to
just like moving forward, I just think like if you try to use maybe half of it, I think that would already help you a lot for it not looking like a wall, but looking like a kind of a square almost might help. And then I love the diagonal idea. I would get into that more. What is activate those diagonals across there. And then I would also suggest make it even skinnier than it is. So it's really absurdly skinny and with tons of face. Yeah,
not double loaded.
It's interesting that Nima's slab has only one corridor, not even a middle one. It's on a side one. It can be the middle one is always a thick one, But if you look at the early modernists, they were really like buildings that were not more than 25 feet thick.
Yeah, that would be great. And actually, then the other side could be full on solar towards just the corridor side. That'd be interesting.
Awesome. So thank you for the comments and presentation, Jonah. And Kyle, thank you for your patience. I know we're never on time here, so apologies in advance. So please take it away.
Oh, you're all, no need to apologize. I will share my screen now. Okay. Just make sure I'm not blocking anything. Awesome. Yeah, so my name is Kyle Balster, and this is my thesis project, Housecraft. So this thesis examines the concept of a skyrise. In its current state, the skyrise is a composition of strided programmatic extrusions. However, moving forward, this thesis aims to organize a skyrise differently, rather as a collection of parts. Using the cabinet of curiosity as a precedent, concepts of individuality and playfulness are utilized in the creation of a fruitful edge condition between the different objects within the composition. So programmatically, this project attacks the social class divided residential sphere. As housing types are separated geographically, physical barriers between types of people are then created. So locally, I'm looking into multiple different scales and types of housing, from single family houses all the way down to the apartment scale. Formally, the tower is comprised of rudimentary shapes where textures and overlap offer complexity as the tower moves upwards. And then the Housecraft collection is comprised of two formal shapes, which are then later scaled, rotated, and extruded, creating variations. Atop each shape is then a unique texture that creates different groups and collections of the shapes themselves. Elevationally, the building is able to have a conversation of the formal objects and how they all then later come together to create the tower as a whole. And then tying all the shapes together is what I would like to refer as like the third object, or the staircases. They later then fill the void of where the shapes are not able to fill, and hold an adequate power to the shapes themselves, and then offer the linkage upon different floors within the high rise. And I'm gonna play maybe. We'll do it here. So within the plan, the different housing types are found creating neighborhoods within each formal shape. From the single family house with a front yard to the apartment building located within each object, communities are then created where individuality for each resident is had not only within the entire building itself, but within each smaller neighborhood or shape. And so located within each plan are the vertical cores that link all of the shapes vertically, but also the different housing types along the planar areas of the entire building. And I will actually flip to this one. So within the turntable, the newly envisioned tower can be seen to fall into its Midtown Manhattan site within the slenderness of its single axis. However, upon the other axis, it breaks free from the site, becoming a collection wall, both formally and programmatically. And then within the perspective drawings, a dissolved hierarchy is seen where each shape holds a similar status, creating a whole. And then composed against the contextual buildings, the individuality and tangible scales are created within each part. However, as a whole, the skyrise becomes more than just an architecture, it becomes a community, a district, or a neighborhood. Thanks.
Just wonder, is it consciously that your floor plans, how to say, are not, how to say, are disconnected to the massing?
Floor plans are disconnected to.
I mean, when you saw the section, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it looked like that the interiority, yeah, is very loose in comparison to the mass, the envelope of the massing. So it looks like as if there would be an empty space in the volume, and then it's like filled out with some few spots. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and so the methodology behind it was almost creating a collection within the collection. So allowing the housing typologies to reside within each shape loosely.
So this is all void here. This is all void, or is it all like circulation space?
Circulation space. Yeah. So there's some pieces, and I guess it's not reading through very well in the video. There's some spaces that actually offer double or triple height spaces that fall through floors. But then as well as that, there are circulation spaces that are between the programmatic masses.
So the floor plate is like more like a car park. It has a plate, and then there are some objects in the plate rather than there is a very particular corridor with rooms on each side. You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, look, it's a very beautiful project. The thing is to work it out as an architectural solution. It would be interesting, you know. There is one project by MBIDV. It sounds strange, but it has a similarity. It's the Mikado Tower, you know, in Madrid. It's much tinier, but it has this idea of the multiplicity of different type of entities working together in one space of circulation. Yeah, I know that you're using a different language and a different thesis. Yeah, but I mean, to look at the project, how it has been worked out architecturally is not uninteresting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you could use some different plans, especially if you're talking about different like types of housing, and some of them having like yards or some of them being very tight knit together in proximity. You could use some different plans that kind of, even if it has furniture, just to kind of stage like what does that exactly look like. And also the question of like if there's very broad circulation space, is that enclosed with windows or is that open? And how do you start to articulate kind of some of these patterns maybe that you've chosen to respond to, you know, maybe some of them become, you know, like punched openings or something.
Yeah.
Or some sort of fenestration or something.
I think it reminds me a little, to bring up MVRDV again, of the Salodem project too, when I see the plans, in that there's a potential for kind of neighborhoods or communities to evolve vertically within the tower. So the formal language produces clearly defined zones within the building that then, I guess there's a question, is the interior of those zones equal to the formal language of that part, or is the interior something else? And I think you're getting to that a little bit with the kind of distribution of interior rooms within the floor plan. But I think you're going to run into lots of problems there if all the rest of that becomes only circulation. I think there might be another strategy where the space between the shell and these interiors is the occupiable space of certain units, and you might have to go back and look at the way that vertical circulation works to imagine that you move up through that tower, you move up through the circulation and you arrive, but when you arrive, you're not arriving to a public space that I walk through the building from, but I'm arriving closer to my unit, which is part of a neighborhood, which has to do with a kind of section of that chunk of the building, as opposed to seeing it as a kind of neutral building that is made up of a bunch of parts. You know, it needs a bit more strategy on the interior of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I thought the idea of having the void space being public, you know, basically it's not terraces, but that's, for example, the public space. And then you always can go into the slab. I think that could be the interesting idea, that the exteriority is public, you know, and then you go from there into the interior.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also I think the overall composition gets a little muddled because everything, you know, and I know this is early on, but because everything is jamming through other things. And I think it should be more like nestling and like pushing together a little bit, so that they all maintain their shapes, you know, rather than disappearing halfway into other things. I think that would be really, really helpful. And they do they're so mashed together too that you have a lot less public space than you used to have. And I know you've studied it in all different ways, like can they intersect, can they not intersect, all the different ways that you were working on it. But I think when they get too mashed together, and as many people said in plan, it starts to just it just sort of gloms, and it feels like it's a facade game more than anything else. And I think that the degree to which you can maintain the independence of the parts is going to make it better and even more interesting.
It seems like too, though, there's a strategy in that comment, which is, the fact that they're merging together tells you that there's a particular problem with the way you're seeing the project, because you could take, say, the pink plus Tom drew in green there, and you could take a version of the plus, scale it, rotate it slightly, and carve away at the yellow mass to produce moments where from the interior I can look out at that strange space between, which might become public space, or it might be a way to just get rid of floor plate where you don't need floor plate, right? So you're using the operative way to think about it to both produce the thing Tom's talking about, which is kind of the uncomfortable, the seam or the tension between elements, but also in the production of that seam, you're producing a strategy for yourself to get rid of things you either don't need, or to add value to something like window space or access to air or something else.
Totally. That's a great idea.
I really am enjoying the project, Kyle. I think there's lots of fantastic things going on in it, formally and aesthetically. And I'm actually sitting next to the Gary Indiana houses with the green shingles, and so it's quite literal for me, your proposal, and now I'm in sort of shingle mode, and I wonder if just to maybe answer some of these questions, which I agree, it seems like it's more like the fabric is getting a little bit muddled between the pieces. If it's possible to find some kind of relief, either the way Tom's notching or shingling, and obviously these are both going to create all kinds of structural challenges, but nonetheless, I think it would be very interesting whether or not the project tries to stay as flat as possible, or if it's only appears flat, and then when you turn to the side, it starts to do this kind of step or shingle notch. It may give you more opportunities if you do the stepping. Sorry, I didn't finish my drawing. I was jumping into the Zoom. And this could be super ugly, so don't do it this way. But it would allow you to have certain kind of cores and other structural, I think something moved. Let me do it again. Cores that come down, or cores that, I don't know why it's not working on my drawing thing, or cores that kind of come and move down through the other buildings, because then you would get both vertical, structural, and cores all starting to, I think, actually alleviate the muddle and give you more freedom to move the pieces around. So there's some kind of a balance there between not the way that it's appearing on your screen, but some kind of balance between allowing for cores to come down or step, and then holding up these sort of wafers, the shingle wafer pieces. I think it's just it's a really great take, and a really beautiful kind of, I think, nuanced shift that you're making. So I'm all in, keep going. And I don't know what the little spiral pieces are, but I think they're cool, and maybe you need them more at the ground than on the top. Maybe they're part of some other kind of scalar play, so you don't just hit the ground flat. It's cool.
I might have to leave, I hope it's fine. Great work, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Peter. We really appreciate
Peter.
Joining us today. I know it's very late and dark. You've had a kind of, the sun is set. We're moving into midnight here.
No, we are getting a biotope here, snakes are coming, all things are moving now.
All right.
Okay. Hey,
All
great
right.
work. Great work. Thanks seeing you, fantastic.
Great seeing you too.
I think it's the last presentation, or I mean, we have seen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
So I think we're done, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to cut Kyle short. Are you good, Kyle? Is there
Yeah.
are there any other comments? Sorry.
No, that was great. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Wonderful.
One last, maybe one very last little thought, Kyle, just to think about it tomorrow when you wake up or whatever. I do think that you could afford, with all the differentiation, the kind of collage-y aesthetic that you're working with, I think you could afford to have a little bit more, even just locally, some continuities jumping or leaping between the parts. Whether that's balconies or fenestration or solar panels or whatever it is that you're using to sort of, at least find little local connections between 3 or 5 elements. I think that would be interesting rather than just just saying like, rectangles like this or, yellow cheese-like things, rotated ones are blue, crosses are always yellow. I think that would be more kind of, would generate sort of more intrigue in the piece.
Yeah.
And I would say the ramps too, the ramps currently, even the way you described it, seem to be just infill. Like you had a void and so you packed it with something. And I think what I would probably suggest is that the voids are strategic in where they show up. And so they happen between figural objects, so that it's a kind of consequence of the relationship between those things. Or you start to produce your own voids, like what I was describing before, where you start to produce your own joints and seams between things. Yeah. So that the void space, much like graphics, white space is a good thing. And for you, that kind of relief from the interior of the building becomes an opportunity that's not always so localized to one zone, but actually becomes a strategy for you on the overall building, which might play into what Tom's describing of, things beginning to combine in certain ways that allow you to challenge their individuality at certain moments, knowing that you're still going to have most of it be kind of clear legibility of the individual.
Yeah. I appreciate all the comments. Thank you.
Nice job, Kyle.
Yeah, good job, everybody.
Yeah, really, really, really amazing to see all the work today. You guys are doing fantastic. Very, very impressive, I must say, just like to do it through this entire circumstance. So congrats to all of you. And this is now a really good place to kind of look back, look forward, make a good plan for what you want at your final, what conversation you'd love to have, and what kind of, let's say, props, what format that's going to take, and then just go for it. I'm sure Abigail can tell you it's both thrilling and amazing to like, oh, there we go.
There she is. Motivation for you guys.
Totally. Because I think you just like want to know, like, really just, you've made it so far. I just want to say, like, go for it. It's worth it. Right, Abigail? Just like all in.
Yes, I wasn't there that long ago. It's doable. And then the next week you'll be like, did that even happen?
Yeah.
But you guys got it. You're doing great so far. And I'm excited to see and follow up on all your guys' projects.
Super. Thank you, Abigail, for joining us. Thank you, Martin. It's a pleasure to meet you, and great having your comments and thoughts. I hope that we get to see you again, at least on Zoom, if not in real life.
Yes, I would love both.
Cool. And as always, Tom, really fun reviewing with you today. It's been a while, and it was great to see your students, and I appreciate all the comments from my students as well. So thanks everyone for a really wonderful midterm. I'll see you guys on Monday. Remember, that's the Gary League thing, so we're on a little bit of a different schedule, and check the Google Doc. Otherwise, thanks. Go enjoy yourself, but with a mask.
Thanks for coordinating us, Devin.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
All right. Be well. Bye.